So, with no further ado, is Kompromat, which purports to tell what really happened with first the Brexit referendum and then the election of Trump, a work of fact or fiction?
Well, I think we've got to leave that to the reader to decide.
That's a swerve.
That's swerve, yeah. The reason I wrote this book was because I was tremendously impressed by President Putin. Now, I know that's not a very fashionable thing to say, but I went off. I have various hats, and one of the hats is I'm an ambassador for the United Nations Convention on Migratory Species. Migratory, not migratory species, but migratory.
Complicated joke. Did you all get it? Joe?
Usually I signal when I make a joke. I just thought I'd slip that one in. Exactly. Right.
There are no longer any great Tories as far as I'm concerned.
Anyway, so there we were.
Fun exception.
There we were in the Mariinsky Hotel in St. Petersburg, and Putin took 4 days off to get a meeting of people together to talk about how they could save tigers around the world. He was taking it unbelievably serious, and we came out with a World Tiger Conservation Plan. And when I got back, and all this other stuff happened, it did occur to me that a man of his huge capability, and I said this, by the way, on, as you rightly said, Loose Women this morning, I said this, a man of his capability, there's no possible way a self-respecting president of Russia with a very, very good intelligence service, the KGB having been succeeded by the FSB, could conceivably have missed the opportunity to destabilize Western Europe by organizing Brexit. I mean, that was my hypothesis, and I still think it is a perfectly plausible hypothesis. I'm not going to go on too long.
No, do.
No. No, I know you want to get your second question.
No.
But anyway, the analogy I use is Stephen Hawking. For years and years and years, he said, dark matter has to exist. It has to exist. And later on, it turned out it did exist. And so when I sometimes talk to my former friends, I shouldn't say former friends, my friends from the diplomatic service and so on and so forth, I say, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's perfectly obvious the Russians had a big hand in Brexit, and it's perfectly obvious we now know more and more they had a big hand in Trump. These friends say, well, there's no evidence. But I say, for heaven's sake, the little training I had in this whole business was you absolutely don't leave evidence unless you want to, which is another matter, and I'll come on to that. You don't leave evidence. Then it might be that they wanted to leave evidence in Salisbury, for example. You've got to think of that. So that wasn't that. I even, by the way, put this to my son, the foreign secretary, and he said, and he's, by the way, in charge of MI6 as well as. Now, maybe he wasn't allowed. Maybe I'm not a kind of need-to-know chap as far as he's concerned. But anyway, he said, as far as he was aware, there was no evidence of Russian involvement in Brexit. Well, what I can say is, in the last year, as Rachel has pointed out, I finished this book in March last year. It came out in hardcover in July. The paperback is here today, and there are copies available at the end of the room. And everything that has happened in that last year since I wrote the book leads me to suppose I was on the right track. Now, I just want to pick up the American point before coming to the British point. America, for heaven's sake. Can people hear me all right?
Yes. Yeah.
You sure? This thing keeps on coming out of my ear. In America, it's become increasingly obvious that there was massive Russian involvement with the US election in November 2016. You can start by saying there was massive Russian involvement in the fact that Trump was an ideal candidate from the Russian point of view, because Trump had years and years and years of dealings with America. Who knows what the financial... Right, with Russia. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, good point. It's very useful to have one's daughter to pick up the howlers. Perfectly obvious that Trump was a very, very useful candidate in any case. Who knows whether or not the Russians actually had anything on Trump? You know, who knows whether all those financial deals were above board and so on. And I rule out the golden showers issue. I'm not going to hang anything on the golden showers. I'm simply saying that he was a natural man for the Russians to support as win. But how did they get him to win? Well, you will see in this book that I have built on what we actually all factually know. We know that the FBI in July 2016 said they wouldn't investigate Clinton's emails any further. But then 11 days before the November election, Comey said, we are going to investigate them again. And that, I think everybody recognizes, was a cosh blow to Hillary Clinton at a vital moment. Now, if you read my account of that story, you will see that I go a little bit further than we yet know, and that is to say, what about the typewriter? When I say a typewriter, I don't mean a typewriter, I mean a computer, obviously. A laptop, which the New York congressman who was married to Clinton's aide had.
Hillary Abbott, what's it?
Yes,
Uma Abedin married
yes,
to
Anthony Weiner.
Anthony Weiner.
Obviously, I'm not using their real names
Yeah.
in the book. I can't remember what names I've picked.
Don't look at me for that.
Anyway, the point I'm getting at, you will find that what actually tipped the balance in those last 10 days was the fact that Comey says that he's going to reopen. And why did he do that? Because someone has looked at the contents of this laptop, and what have they discovered? They have discovered an exchange of what's called sext. Does anybody know what I mean by sexting? Okay. Sex messages between the congressman and what he thinks is an underage, not an underage, an overage schoolgirl in Indiana. Okay, but it isn't, of course. It is a lady called Galina Aslanova, who is the head of the FSB special projects, and she is pretending she's leading him on. And you can actually, if you go to the Daily Mail website, you can see every single exchange which Weiner had with this.
So this was a Russian honey trap for Weiner in order to bring down the Democrats.
The Russian honey trap, and that was the purpose of this book. Anyway, let's come to the.
Wait, Darren.
Yeah.
But that's fact or fiction?
The fact is this exchange of text messages between what was then the U.S. an ex-U.S. congressman
Weiner,
and what appered to be.
But she was a Russian.
What appeared to be a lady of tender age in Indiana. But for the purposes of my book, at any rate,
okay, right. In the book, she's a Russian honey trap.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, are we all clear?
No.
What I'm really trying to say is that the Russians wrapped up America very early on, and they delivered it. But basically, that's what they got. They got what they wanted. They got the election of Trump. Okay, but people say, oh no, but they never intervened in Europe. They never intervened in Britain. Well, why on earth wouldn't they have intervened in Britain? If you go back to this brilliant man, Putin, and he sat there bare-chested in, firing darts at the tiger. For heaven's sake, don't tell me. Don't tell me they didn't think. Okay, so what happened? According to my book, it all goes back to Mr. Cameron, except I'm not calling him Mr. Cameron. Let me be clear about that. I am calling him Jeremy Hartley. Okay. Now, by the way, I hadn't realized that Jeremy was going to become such a popular name when I wrote the book. Anyway, I look at Michael Coppin. I say to myself, people with long memories will remember Cameron's speech in October 2005 when he was trying to become elected as the next Tory leader. And anybody who reads that speech reads it as a complete Eurosceptic bid. Okay, you may say cynically, he was only being Eurosceptic because he wanted to get the votes of the, the parliamentary party and
The bastards.
he wanted to get, yes, he wanted to get the, you could say that. Or you could say, oh no, maybe he was always a Eurosceptic. Maybe he actually, thought that, well, maybe Britain's future is better. There's still people who think that, Maybe Britain's future is better out of, I know they may not be here, but I tell you, there are people who genuinely believe that Britain is better off out of the EU. And maybe Cameron, not Cameron, Hartley, was one of those. That's the hypothesis. Okay, so how does he deliver this? How does he deliver this? He knows he hasn't got a majority in the House of Commons for Brexit, for leaving. He knows that. So he thinks, well, what about if I make a speech at the Bloomberg Centre in April 2013, just pick a date, April 2013. And what about in that speech, I suggest that we might have a referendum about staying in Europe. And what about if later on we actually put this in the Tory manifesto of 2015? And of course I can say to myself, well, this is just to keep, the bastards happy, the right-wing Tories happy. But what if he actually thought, this is a way of getting what I want, getting Britain out? And what if, there's a kind of carrot here, and that is that the Russians have said, well, or maybe Cameron doesn't even know, maybe the party chairman is approached and said, look, there's about £20 million available, for you on, bits and pieces here and there, one thing and another. And the party chairman says, well, it's jolly nice to have a bit of extra funding. We might have to fight for it. So that's the concept. That is the concept, that the Tories went into this referendum in a purely cynical way because they thought that they weren't going to win it necessarily, but if they did, then as far as the Prime Minister was concerned, it was what he wanted. He wanted to come out. And that, of course, is what has happened. That is what has happened, because this is where various other I don't want to give away so much of this book, but none of you are going to buy it. That's obvious. But I just want to tell you a few other crucial things. Okay, and obviously we can't deal in personalities here, but let's imagine that the people who ran the Vote Leave campaign were very clued up people. Let's imagine, for example, they'd heard of a firm called Cambridge Analytica. Just imagine that. And let's imagine that Cambridge Analytica said to them, hey, look, we can harvest a lot of people's Facebook data, and we can work out, all the people you really need to address with targeted messages. And what if actually they said, or didn't even have to say, and we think we've got some pretty good people producing targeted messages for these targets we have identified. And they don't need to say that there are whole streets in St. Petersburg full of people drafting fake news messages, or indeed there's a whole place in Macedonia which does the same. They don't necessarily need to explain all that, because our people who ran the Vote Leave campaign are pretty astute people, so they know the target and they know they've got the message. But even so, as we get closer to 2016 June, as we get closer, our leader, and I'm not now talking about the political figures, I'm talking about the whiz kids here. I'm talking about the whiz kids, really bright people. People who understand computers and things. And they say, no, we're not going to get this over the line. And this is where, of course, again, the Russian thing comes in absolutely crucially. Okay, it comes in because the Russian troll factories have produced the material, to spread out. But it comes in crucially because the Russians know that what is really going to get them and the Brexiteers over the line is the immigration issue. And what was the biggest surprise of those early months of 2016? It was Mrs. Merkel. I don't call her Mrs. Merkel, obviously. I call her Helga Braun. Helga Braun, she makes this amazing speech in the Bundestag, and she says at the end of it, "Wir schaffen das." If you remember, we can do it. We can do it. And what could she do? We can do it. She meant we're going to have 3 million immigrants coming into Germany. In those 3 months before June, all chaos broke out. If you looked at the videos, if you looked at the newspapers, if you looked at the television of any kind, you saw endless replays of refugees drowning, of people swarming over barriers. You had the attack in Paris, you had Nice. All of this was cunningly linked, and into this, as it were, agreement. And I'm saying there was, for the purposes of the argument, an agreement between Russia, Germany, and Turkey, or more precisely, Helga Braun and Turkey, to let it rip. And that is really what happened. And at a certain moment, there's a kind of ironic episode where Cameron, he's not called Cameron, but Jeremy Hartley, is deeply frustrated because it looks as though the EU at the last minute is going to come up with an acceptable offer to the British. You know, it looks as though even this totally feeble negotiation, the EU is going to say yes to it. And there's a very bad moment, and he goes to Akrep, and he goes to the council, and he's sitting there in the council, and the president of the commission says, you know, do we all have an agreement? And at the last minute, the German chancellor arrives late, and says, no, not as far as I'm concerned. This is an agreement. I get pretty technical at this point. Having spent years and years in Brussels, I thought at least I'll draft the kind of agreement which Cameron could have accepted, except he didn't want it. And that was to solve the immigration issue by saying not just a deal for Britain, but a deal for every single member state. If circumstances really reach intolerable level, then every member state can bring in measures. Anyway, this is getting pretty technical. I'm saying that the upshot of it all was that the Brexit wins. Now, this is where the second British Prime Minister plays an absolutely vital role. And I haven't mentioned her before, but I just will now. Her name is not, obviously, Theresa May. Her name is Mabel Killick. Okay? Now, Mabel Killick is Home Secretary, and all the time there's an investigation going on about whether or not the Tories really did get money from the Russians, etc. And she is the only person who knows this dossier. And at a crucial moment, that's to say after the Brexit vote, she goes to the Prime Minister and she says, don't think you can hang on in here, Prime Minister. I know what you've been up to. And he takes it on the chin. And he walks out of that door, you know, to everybody's great surprise. When Michael Howard lost the election, he stayed another 6 months in power. Cameron goes the next day. And why does he go the next day? Because Mabel Killick knows for a fact, because she has the so-called Brexit dossier, that he has been up to no good. Now, she then says to her aides, you know what I'm going to do with this dossier. I'm going to hide it in my sock drawer back in my leafy home in Maidenhead. And they say, well, shouldn't you hand it back in, Prime Minister? And she's no. And this is the point. This is where.
This is the dossier that shows that the Russians gave £20 million to the Vote
story.
Leave campaign, right? Is that, am I right?
You're absolutely right. This is the dossier which shows, which spells it all out. It spells money to the Tories, not cash for policies, but cash for the referendum. It shows, in so many words, the links between Russia, Germany, Turkey, and the Brexit movement. It shows some pretty fishy stuff between the UK and the US among the Brexiteers. But it's only known really to the Home Secretary because it was all kept very quiet, this investigation. And she then uses it, and maybe in the second volume, if there ever is a sequel, will be somebody who gets hold of the Brexit dossier and says, ho ho, doesn't this whole question of the Russian involvement in the UK referendum, doesn't it put in a new light this whole question of whether or not we should be having, you know, Brexit at all? Am I being absurd?
Or whether we should have a second referendum.
Or whether we should have a second referendum. No, I'm going to finish on this last point. It is perfectly possible, you see, that actually Russia takes a pretty long view, and what has really been to their advantage is perhaps not in and out as such, but the general state of chaos, which we are now in. So you could argue, at this point, for the Russians to let it be revealed that yes, they were involved, would even be another victory for them, because people would then say, oh my golly, we've got to have a revisit the referendum, so there'll be another chaos for another 5 years, but there's a second referendum, and then the Brexiteers will say it's not fair. And so what I mean is, you can imagine this going on forever and ever and ever. And in the meantime, of course, in the meantime, oddly enough, our own government is now taking a very tough line on the Salisbury issue. I'm not going to go into Salisbury, there's a lot of people who know more, and they're taking a tough line on Syria, and we may even fire a Tomahawk missile.
Yes, I mean, your thesis that Russia has managed to cause chaos in Europe hasn't really been borne out by recent events.
Well, it has, if you like. I mean, I think it has, because you've got Beppe Grillo in...
Oh, well, yes, the rise, yes, in terms of the immigration causing nationalism, yes, but not in terms of a security paralysis or breakdown.
Well, I think...
Or maybe not.
Look, I think you could say that any idea that the EU is now going to continue to push, you know, for NATO countries, you know, Ukraine to become NATO and Georgia to become in NATO, all that is gone.
Finished.
And I think the potential breakup of the EU was a massive, massive goal for Russia, and even the destabilization. Look at the way we've all been focusing on Brexit for 3 years, and will go on for years and years and years. And look, I obviously haven't talked about Viktor Orban and things like that either. Anyway, so there you are. And I promise you, I probably made it sound rather boring, but it's actually not boring. And it's going to be. I'm glad to say.
Oh yes.
Tanya, where is Tanya? Tanya, I'm glad to say that Channel 4 didn't think it was as boring as Orban, because they are going to make a 6-part television series about it, and I hope this will come out. Now, where do I stand on Brexit itself? Just leaving the novel aside, where I stand.
Should I stop this? Should I stop it?
Yeah, stop.
Yeah, no, wait. I think maybe not.
Yeah, stop. Anyway, that's my thesis, and I'd like to ask people here: how come that we have failed to uncover? We got Damon Collins beavering away, and what have they come up with?
Wait. Why have we failed to uncover Russian involvement in Brexit?
Because they're deadly cunning.
Because it's all in the book.
They haven't read the book.
They haven't read the book, and when it will all become clear when they've all read the book. What I can't, I mean, it's very hard to see each actor's motivation in the sense of state actor. Why did Angela Merkel want to destabilise Europe by allowing in the millions
Well,
from
what
Syria?
you've got to remember, you've got to go back to 1989. You've got to go back to the time when Vladimir Putin was head of the KGB office in Dresden, which you remember. And there's a most brilliant moment when, as the Berlin Wall falls, the anti-Stasi crowds are gathering in the streets of Dresden, and they actually get to the KGB office in Dresden. And this is true, this is not fiction. Now, then Putin, who is then Colonel Putin, Lieutenant Colonel, I can't remember, he actually stands on the doorstep of his house with a pistol and says, if you come in, you know, you'll have me to answer. Okay, why is that crucial? It is because Helga Braun, I'm now slipping into fiction again, Helga Braun, who for the purposes of my novel, you can imagine as being the German Chancellor, was not actually a Stasi agent, but was a KGB agent. So what was the link there was the fact that they grew up in their professional careers very close to each other in East Germany. And by the way, those who know this field know that German chancellors have form as far as being Soviet agents are concerned. I mean, you can think of Willy Brandt, who had this fellow Guillaume, one of our finest. Don't want to give anything away here. You can think of Schroeder. What did Schroeder do the moment he took a job with Rosneft? You know, I mean, German chancellors have form, so it's not out of the question.
I was thinking more in terms of national interest. It was obviously, in terms of plot, she was ex-KGB or she was a double agent, so I understand why she did Putin's bidding in the novel, but I don't understand why she'd do that, as it were, in real geopolitical life.
Well,
Why would Angela Merkel / Helga Braun want to destabilise Europe?
In real life, you could say that that it's not a foregone conclusion that even in Germany the Europhile party is going to always dominate.
Right.
It's not hopelessly. You have the German Supreme Court, which is always trying to claw back on the federal level. You have the AfD, which I think is it not now the largest single party in Germany? It's certainly the official opposition in Germany now. Yeah, I agree. Okay, you picked up a flaw in the book. My view is that she.
I didn't mean to. I mean, I thought you might have a
my
plausible.
view, frankly, is that she's an agent. She is an FSB agent. That is the line.
I'd like to hear a bit more about your sense of whether the Tory party, sort of on both sides, as it were, you've proved that your contention is that David Cameron / Jeremy Hartley secretly wanted a Leave success. So, do you think that is consonant with actually events?
I give him the credit. I say this man is probably an honourable man. And he says, look, I go back actually, people here will have long memories, some of them will, and some will remember Gatesfield's speech in 1962 to the Labour Party conference. It was the most brilliant speech, and he took the arguments through as to whether or not the Labour Party should approve of the idea of Britain joining Europe. Totally brilliant. You can get it online. And having rehearsed all these arguments, it was a long speech, so much better than most of the speeches you get, party conferences now. He says, and 1,000 years of history, ladies and gentlemen, are we to throw that away? And then he pauses and he says, or should we give it some thought? Do you see what I mean?
Yes, I do.
This was an honest chap, and I'm perfectly prepared to say to myself, for the purpose of my novel, that my Prime Minister, the first Prime Minister, not necessarily a bad man. He actually believes that this country does have a future outside Europe, and if you look at it in the long run, you may look at this 40-year, is it 45 years now?
As a blip.
And say it's a blip. It's a blip in the great glorious history. So I give him credit on that.
I didn't find a huge amount. I mean, I know that the party never really sold our membership of Europe well to the electorate, and it only became a live issue close to the referendum. But I did go back to that conference speech where you say that he was very Eurosceptic, and I couldn't find an awful lot, but I found this. He said the Labour government, this is Cameron Tories, October 2005, the Labour government's made promises that no one believes, passed powers to a European Union that nobody trusts, and set up regional assemblies that nobody wants and nobody ever voted for. But apart from that, I couldn't find much in that speech.
In that same speech, as I recall, he also said, I'm going to pull out our Euro MPs from
I couldn't find that, but I remember we talked about that.
Didn't he say it then?
He used that then. He said it later, under pressure in the...
And what was the significance? Can we talk about the significance of that for...
Well, I think it was significant. It was a pretty dramatic move. I'd left the European Parliament by then, but it was a pretty dramatic move as far as the MEPs were concerned, because it's never been part of the, what you might call the centrist grouping. They had to join the fringe grouping of the other parties, which is, by the way, where they still are.
Yes, they were taken out. Was it the EPP? No, what was it?
PPE.
No. Can anyone remember? Yeah, that's it.
Anyway, there it is, Rachel. I'm so grateful to you for reading this book. A lot of things.
I read it a long time ago. There are an inordinate number of characters. Didn't Rose, one of your granddaughters, count how many characters there are in the book? But you don't actually have one of those Jilly Cooper-likes list of characters, so she must have gone through it, counting them one by one.
In the paperback version, and by the way, I want to pay credit
to the publishers.
Where are they? Where is Margot? Margot Wheel? Has she gone? No, Margot. Well done, Margot. I thought One World Publishing brought this out very, very quickly. Unbelievable. I finished it in March. They had the hardcover version in July. Yeah, it was a superb effort. And I honestly do believe that. Well, put it this way: it's ironic, isn't it? Here we are, faced with the consequences of getting out very, very quickly. And I say to myself, what if actually the kind of thing which is now coming out in the United States comes out here? And what I think will happen is the government will make absolutely certain it doesn't come out, because that is what we do in this country. we make sure we clamp down on, difficult information.
How much do you think that would have to be provable? I think the problem we have with having the Russians maybe funding data analytica and harvesting of data is it's very hard to prove that people voted a certain way because they saw an ad on Facebook rather than an ad on the side of a bus.
Well,
and therefore, where actually will it end?
But what about endless newsreel clips about refugees? What about all that?
Again,
all that kind of thing? No?
I think it's hard to prove it, isn't it? It's hard to say that 17.4 million people voted this way because they were exposed to, even fake news.
Well, I'm just offering a hypothesis.
Yeah.
I am
It's
just
not the numbers, it's the fact that it happens. Any kind of influence is very serious. That can be proved. Don't you think?
Well, arguably, you could say it's up to the electorate to, decide for themselves whether what they are seeing or reading is fair and accurate and true, not the publisher of the
Wouldn't it go to
evidence.
court if there was enough evidence?
Well, I think this is where we are.
Well, I think if the Electoral Commission were to have some power, and if you had a really, strong Electoral Commission, if they said, look, we do want to investigate.
But we don't have a strong Electoral Commission.
We don't. But a couple of weeks ago, I came to this very room, and there was an absolutely brilliant evening organised by Frontline and another body whose name escapes me for a moment.
Was that the one with Christopher Wiley?
That was when the two whistleblowers presented their evidence, and I thought this deeply
And
convincing.
has this changed your mind about where you stand on Brexit now? Which I think I've braced myself for this.
Well, as Martin Luther King said, when I say Martin Luther King, I don't mean Martin Luther King, I mean Martin Luther. I don't know where the King crept in. What he said is, "Hier stehe ich kann nicht anders." So that's where I stand.
This is where I stand, I can do no other.
That's it. And now, why do you open the questions?
No, we'll, because it's not time yet, I'm afraid. We've got to carry on, we've got to keep buggering on for a bit. I think that you've been through you've been on your own Brexit journey, haven't you? Because you were strongly campaigned for Remain. You fronted environmentalists for Europe, and then we left, and the country had to make the best of it and just get on with it. But now it seems to me that all this stuff about data has changed your mind again, and you think that we could have the worst of both worlds based on a false prospectus and a very, very shonky referendum, right?
I tell you what, deep down, I say to myself, wouldn't it be absolutely wonderful if every line in this book proved to be true, and there was a massive uproar in the country, and people said, we really must have a vote in Parliament,
with all the
but a free
MPs,
vote
not
in
just
Parliament,
ministers,
possibly. Or if that didn't happen,
Second referendum.
I think I would buy into that. I would say, look, that would be enough for me to change where I now stand. I mean, I told you where I now stand. I agree with Boris. No.
But do you think that would be enough for the country? I mean, it's enough for you, but do you think that the polls aren't moving?
This is where
it's
you've
not
got to
shifting.
get out of London. That is a very, very good point. You've got to get out of London, because I have been out of London. I have been out of London.
You were like Cameron who said, I once met a
I
black
have
man in
been on-
Southampton.
I have been on a journey. And I tell you, everything I've said tonight would not necessarily ring a lot of bells up in the northwest or the northeast of England. That is the point. And they say, oh, get on with it, for Christ's sake. They wouldn't say, for Christ's sake. I'll take that back. Laura, you come to shove something.
Interesting.
No, I think, to answer your question, I don't think it's a foregone conclusion at all. This evidence that there was serious interference with the referendum probably much the same way as in America. Even if you prove that there's serious interference with Trump, they might still vote for Trump again. I think that you would have a big job to do in the country, because as I understand it, I might be wrong, there's still not a sort of massive feeling out there in the country that they want a second referendum. Is there?
No, there isn't. I think that the latest polls show that if it was held again, it would be 52 Remain, 48 Leave. But you need to have a much bigger margin for it to be worth calling a second referendum.
Why would you need a bigger margin? You know, it was 52-48 to Leave, so why can't it be 52-48 to Remain?
Well, the answer to that is the people who are organising around Remain politically will not risk a second Leave vote under those, unless it's actually pretty guaranteed that Remain will win the next vote.
Okay.
They want a margin of about 10 to 20% before they really push for something like a second
But how are
referendum.
these polls conducted, and are these polls credible at all?
No, and they're just polls.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
They could be, you know, planted by Putin. Do we want to open it up to
Yeah, why not?
questions?
Let's do that.